Dealing with Betrayal within Conflict Resolution with Raheena Lalani Dahya. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to LMI Podcast, Lawyers, Mediators International, where we talk about law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Welcome back to this conversation we're going to be having today with Raheena Lalani Dahya, a mediator who's based in Canada, but who has worked all over the world. From what I understand, you grew up in like 4 different countries yourself. So
I did.
you're quite the international traveler, Raheena, but you're not a stranger to this podcast. You've been here before. You've spoken here some time ago. I think you were first on with another podcast co-host, Thomas Giulioni, who had
That's
invited you, and then you came back. So we've done a few episodes together, and this one is going to be no less different, no less powerful. It's going to be very informative to the folks out there, particularly to conflict resolution professionals like lawyers and mediators. So welcome back, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate returning. It's always so great being on your show.
Yes, well, thank you so much. And so, for folks who don't know you, I will share my screen just to show your LinkedIn profile, because that's one of the best places people can go to check you out, and they can go see all your posts. You're pretty big on social media, several thousand followers. And so if you don't know her, get to know her, because I like to say that you're the next Ken Cloak, because you, like him, have an extremely vast amount of knowledge. But you're also pretty young, which tells me you have quite the future trajectory, in front of you, where you're going to be sharing a whole lot in this space. And
Thank
so
you.
you,
It's one of the
yeah,
nicest things anyone's ever said.
yeah. Well, you're a professor, and you teach at Humber Polytechnic, and
That's
you're a faculty member in family law mediation programs at various institutions across Canada,
right.
and as a lawyer in the Ontario, and an unregistered barrister in England and Wales. So you're accredited as a mediator by multiple international institutions. So definitely you know what you're talking about, because you have the qualifications. But
I
could
think what we
you,
really mean by that is I'm a really big geek. I
yeah,
think that's the summary.
exactly. So we always talk about your geekhood and how this stuff is a passion for you, right? You love to
Mhm.
talk about it and showcase your knowledge to the world. And so it's genuine. I love having you on. So why don't we, could you first maybe tell folks a little bit of something about you that people might not know?
Yeah, sure. Things people wouldn't know. I'm a certified yoga instructor.
Oh,
Uh,
yes, that's true.
yes,
You teach yoga. And
well,
so,
I substitute teach here and there, but it's an important part of my life. And one thing I don't think many people think about is how compatible yoga and mediation are. Maybe that's a subject for a different day. I know today you wanted to talk about something different.
yes, yes, yes. Well, yeah, we'll talk about yoga another day, but today we're talking about betrayal. And
Hmm.
so I think this is going to become a part of a sub series where we're going to talk about powerful emotions
Hmm.
and strong issues that impact mediation for good or for bad. And this topic of betrayal is one of those, where
Hmm.
people come to you to help them resolve their conflict, but there has been a severe breakdown in trust, because one person, whether it's perceived or not, feels that they have been so hurt and wounded by the other party
Hmm.
that it might seem to them that it's impossible that they might be able to build bridges and help resolve the dispute between them. So that's what I wanted you to come on and talk about today. First, generally, what is betrayal? but also
Hmm.
getting into the human brain, and because this is one of the things that you excel at, and in a way that's going to help mediators and other conflict resolution professionals to be able to do their best work to help
Yeah.
those two people who are in front of them build bridges and build rapport and get some trust back so that we can help the parties move from these strong emotions where they've had a amygdala hijacking to where they're able to get some peace between them and hopefully resolve their dispute. But why don't I let you take it over and just tell us what is betrayal and what does the science say about it all?
Yeah, so I think you had looked up the definition of betrayal. Maybe this is a good time for you to introduce that, and
Sure.
then I'll just say I'm less scientifically knowledgeable on betrayal. I do have some science behind it.
Yep.
Where I think, I'll delve into it and I'll tease out different pieces, both scientifically and just in terms of practice, things that we can do in our practices every day to support our clients who are struggling with issues of betrayal.
Yes. So the dictionary definition of betrayal is the act of betraying someone or something, or the act of being betrayed, a violation of a person's trust or confidence, of a moral standard, etc. And so there's different forms of betrayal. The most common one we think about is a divorce situation where there's adultery, someone cheated on somebody else.
Yeah.
And that, to some people, that there's no pain greater than that kind of betrayal. But it can be taken to treason, for example, where
Mm.
somebody is burning a flag or somebody is helping aid the enemy, and where your countrymen might feel that that is a form of betrayal that cannot be tolerated.
Yeah.
And you're outside the camp, cast out, so to speak, because there's no trust anymore. So it can be personal and it can be societal, so, and everything in between, okay,
Yeah.
whether it's the standard or something. But at the mediation table, we see this dynamic come up where then betrayal becomes the issue that causes breakdown or inability to have the people come together.
Yeah, yes, and for those of you who aren't mediators yet, we're a big fan of reframing the word "but" with "and." It takes some of the sting out of it. So that's
Yeah.
maybe tip number one. Yes, and looking at betrayal from a wide perspective, there are different levels of betrayal, different depths of betrayal. Um, I might feel betrayed if you say that you really want Italian food tonight, and I gear myself up to go to the Italian restaurant, and then at the last minute you say, you know what? Instead, I really feel like Chinese. That is a minor violation of trust,
Yep.
unless there's a history. And so, as you know, I practice family law mediation, so I deal with people who have extensive histories with one another.
Mhm.
And I think that's the first thing we need to look at with trust. So, tapping onto the science for 2 seconds, I recently read a paper, I'll provide you with it, or at least a link to it, where they were looking at the role of oxytocin, which is it's often known as the cuddle hormone or the love hormone. It's looking at the role of oxytocin in how we handle betrayal, how we perceive betrayal. And something that caught my attention over and above the conclusion was that they were using the measure that they use is something called the trust game. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, so the trust game is a way that researchers measure how people trust. And in this particular paper, the way that they'd framed the trust game was there was someone on the other side. It turned out that it was actually a computer program.
Okay.
And what they do is they create an environment where participants in the research are asked to make bets and trust this other party. And only when they are betrayed do they behave a particular way. And so what they're doing is they're measuring trust,
Okay.
and they're measuring retaliation. And so if
Mm.
you look at just about any research on the trust game, it's totally fun to geek out on. One thing that sits with me is, well, this is great in the lab.
Hmm.
By the time you get to the mediation room, often parties have relationships. So my very first thought is I want to understand the length and intensity of the relationship. If it is a short-term, low-intensity relationship, I might be talking about the clerk at the till at the grocery shop that I sometimes frequent and sometimes do not.
Mm.
The one who, when I'm really hungry at 8:45 in the evening and I'm running to the grocery store and I get there at 8:57 and the clerk goes, you can't come in. We close at 9.
Yeah.
That can leave me feeling upset. That can leave me feeling like my expectations have been violated. But it's a low intensity relationship. And so long as I don't frequent there often and I haven't built relationships with these people, it's a short term relationship. I may never see this clerk again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a short term, short intensity, or, just maybe a bus driver that you're not going to see again. Then you've got short term, high intensity. So I'm just, we can imagine the middle ground.
Yeah.
This might be, we don't know each other, but we got into a car accident.
Mm.
And you hit my car, and in the process of the crash, my child lost a leg. It's a short-term relationship, but the intensity when I think about my relationship to this person is quite significant. And you see this in politics, right?
Mm.
Sometimes people don't have a relationship, a one-on-one, an interpersonal relationship, but they've got this idea of their politician or the politician against them. Now, I would argue that that's actually more like a midterm relationship because of the way things go around on social media, because of the way that politicians engage us. So, when I give this framework, it's not clear and cut and stick people in squares. It's about thinking about these things like on a spectrum.
Yes.
A midterm relationship might be a coworker that I've worked with for 3 years. And so we have a series of interactions that have formed our understanding of one another. And within there, we've made some memories together, some of which are positive, some of which are negative. And those inform the way that I'm going to behave around this coworker. And should they leave, I may miss them or feel relief if I don't like them very much.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got invested feelings that have built over time around these people. Now, if I take that language to the science, what I could say instead of invested feelings over time is I have more neurons wiring together with respect to this person. What do I mean here? So neurons are they're a part of our neuroanatomy, so just part of the way that our brain is built, and they have these arms. I'm gonna treat them like people for a second. They've got these arms called dendrites, and at the end of the dendrites, we can imagine they have fingers, and those are synapses. Now, when we are learning anything or forming an opinion, whenever we're picking up information, the more information we have about a particular thing, the more our synapses connect. So several neurons might connect, and the more tightly neurons connect, the more they're sheathed in this goo called myelin.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean here in this midterm relationship is my brain has invested several synapses to how to behave around this person, around our history, around my perception of this history. And so, of course, I'm going to have maybe a stronger reaction to things that occur with that person than I will with the clerk at the store or the bus driver.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's go to a long-term relationship. Let's take a parent-child relationship or a marriage relationship. So you had mentioned cheating.
Yeah.
Which, of course, you and we both practice family law mediation, so we're around that a fair bit. These relationships can be lifelong if they're siblings or parents. They can form a significant, more than 50% of your life, more than 66% of your life, if you've been with someone for a very, very long time. And what's interesting about these relationships are not only are they intense, but here's where we go to attachment theory. I know I said I had very little science, but I think I was thinking that I had very little science about the amygdala on this particular one. Now here's a great one, attachment theory. I'm going to provide you with a couple of links to some reads that is a that are good places to start. In fact, one of my blogs, I started it pre-pandemic, and then about 5 or 6 posts in, the pandemic hit, and I paused it, and I have not picked it up. But I actually lay out the basics of attachment theory there, or the beginnings of the basics.
Yeah, I'll link to it.
Yeah. So with attachment theory, this is the idea that we evolved to love one another, and that we have a short, a very few people that we love, and that this is a safety mechanism that we've evolved, and that that stands to reason. Uh, if I fall down and I hurt myself, if someone loves me, they're going to come and help me get up, and they're going to help take care of me because they love me. And if someone that I love, they fall or hurt themselves, or if they have a child and then they pass away, I'm so invested because I love this person. So attachment theory tells us love is a safety mechanism that we evolved, and we bond, or what we call attachment. So we attach, we form attachment bonds securely or insecurely. Now, if we're secure, we tend to rely on effective communication. Here's why. When we're securely attached, we don't really worry about the longevity or the safety of our bond. Having a fight doesn't mean that we're breaking up. Having an argument does not mean that my brother's not going to talk to me for 5 years. It's an argument, it gets heated, and we can expect repair afterwards. We'll touch on repair in a little bit. However, we also bond insecurely, and those are, according to attachment theory, other evolutions as well. So, when we're in an environment where it's very safe, we're probably going to form secure attachment bonds because we can rely on someone to look after us. Our loved ones can rely on us. And that means we can take risks in the world. That means we can innovate. That means it's okay if I go off and try something new because someone's going to catch me. So I often invite people to think about secure attachment, or any attachment, like a trampoline. So secure attachment means that, if you try something and you go out there and you try a cool flip, there's somebody to catch you.
Yeah.
And you can bounce off of them. Because you're secure in your relationships, you can bounce off and really get that height and get that room to play. But when we're insecurely attached, it's a different story. So all of this goes back to something called the strange situation test, which was conducted by Mary Ainsworth, who worked with John Bowlby, who's the father of attachment theory. And what happened here was they were measuring how infants responded if they had attachment distress. How would they respond? And in the strange situation test, what occurred was they left children with their primary caregiver. I believe in all the tests it was a mother. And they'd put the child kind of like in a pediatrician's waiting room. There'd be a little, some games for the kids.
Yeah.
And the primary caregiver would be there. And in all instances, the baby would be playing. And then the researcher would pop in and ask the mom to come out just for a minute. And in all of these instances, there was a stranger in the room. So, in each instance, the mom kind of says to a stranger, would you mind keeping an eye on my kid? Or the primary caregiver, would you mind keeping an eye on the child? And they step out. In all instances, the baby became distressed when they realized the parent wasn't there.
Yeah.
What we were looking at was how the baby responded. So what happens here when the parent returns? If the baby's secure, they'll be very upset. They'll accept the parent's soothing. They'll, be a little cautious. And then eventually when they get back on the ground, they'll turn around, keep checking mom's there, and eventually calm down and return to play. That allows their brain to expand, to let those synapses wire together. There's a fun term we use, neurons that wire together, fire together. So you get your synapses together. And then basically when we're learning things, we have like electric shock. So I want you to imagine that I'm kind of shocking here, and that builds that bond between our synapses.
Yeah.
So that allows the baby to go play, to go learn the world, for their brain to take up all of this. There was two other babies though. One other type of baby, when the parent came back in, they looked cool, calm, and collected. And on the outside, it almost looked like this baby was independent. Now this baby would kind of look at the parent and go, okay, so you're here, fine, doesn't really matter. Now the third type of baby, when the parent returned, they wouldn't become soothed. They might behave hostilely to the parent and be angry with the parent while at the same time holding on really tightly. They cannot bring down their distress. Now, interestingly, when we take baby 2, the one who's cool, calm, and collected, seemingly, this is what we call an avoidant baby, and I'm going to use Levine and Heller's language for this because it's really consumable. There is academic language for it. I put it on my blog, which I know you're linking to. So the avoidant baby and the anxious baby, the one who cannot be soothed, if you take their blood, you'll find the same levels of cortisol. If you take their heartbeat, you'll find that they're both exhibiting physical signs of distress via their heartbeat. So what's happening here? The secure baby just knows, okay, we're good and I can express my distress. My parent will meet my distress. They'll soothe me. Because they can meet my needs, I can go off and play. But the avoidant baby seeks distance as a safety mechanism. And the anxious baby seeks proximity as a safety mechanism. Now, over time, what happens is, especially as people grow, we see something called protest behavior. Protest behavior occurs when we have attachment insecurity, and so we use these tactics that aren't things we're necessarily thinking about. These are reactions that behave like acting out. For someone who's anxious, they might call several times. They need proximity, and until they get that proximity, they're not okay.
Yeah.
And the distance seeker might stonewall the other person until they feel more comfortable. And so you see these accusations in relationships. In fact, the Gottmans talk about the four horsemen of the apocalypse of marriage, and I believe one of them is stonewalling. Now, where I think we take from the Gottmans in psychology and go into neuroscience is what's happening in their brains. And I'm going to tell you, but before I do, I want to tell you about a fourth baby that was discovered later.
Okay.
And that was what we call disorganized. And this is someone who doesn't have a coherent strategy. The avoidant has a coherent strategy of distance. The anxious has a coherent strategy of proximity. The disorganized doesn't know. So it switches between the two. This can be the case with, I love Mummy. Mummy is fun. I like her cuddles, but Mummy has cancer and the needles scare me. I want to be close to Mummy. I want to be far from Mummy. I want to be close to Mummy. I want to be far from Mummy. Similarly, in a case of domestic violence, I love Daddy. He's fun. He puts me on his shoulders. I want to see Daddy. I want to spend time with Daddy. But Daddy hits Mummy and I find it really scary. I don't want to be near Daddy. Want time with Daddy? Don't want time with Daddy. Want time with Daddy? Don't want time with Daddy. And so what we know with disorganized is that those styles are often informed by trauma.
Got it.
And of course, there's so many different forms of trauma. So this final type of relationship, these are attachment relationships. And one of my favorite ways of explaining them is when we form attachment bonds, when we come to love somebody, they get real estate in our nervous systems. And here's the catch. There's no evicting them. So if you go to, just switch on Netflix, pick like 5 romances. The Old Flame story, they've got real estate in the nervous system. That's where it reactivates from. But it also works well, right? Like Moana or The Lion King. Simba, I have this fascinating, I have this thing where I tell The Lion King in terms of Simba's trauma and attachment. And if you notice, you're never going to see the Lion King the same. At the very beginning, Simba's secure. He lives with his mama Sarabi and his daddy Mufasa, and he's got his best friend Nala. Um, and he can take risks. He can go out even where he's told not to because he knows he's okay. He knows someone's there to catch him. And then we fast forward in the movie to when Mufasa dies.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, this big thing occurs and it changes his attachment style. Now he wants to go back to Pride Rock. He wants to get back to Mum and Nala. But his other attachment figure, Uncle Scar, has told him, no, it's your fault. Wants to go back to Pride Rock, can't go back to Pride Rock. Wants to go back to Pride Rock, can't go back to Pride Rock. Fast forward, he passes out in the jungle, meets two new friends. They basically become brothers to him. Their entire philosophy is to seek distance from anyone who matters, right? That is the essence of their group song. Just to stay away from everybody. Pumbaa's run away from his herd, and Timon's done the same. So he accrues, now that he's got some safety, some relational safety, he accrues their avoidant attachment style. And that carries him on through life until he sees Nala again. And now she's looking pretty fine, right? Like, now we see childhood bestie attachment figure turn into an adult romantic relationship. And now he's stuck again. Wants to go back to Pride Rock. Nala said she needs him. Nala said his mum needs him. Can't go back to Pride Rock. Everybody will know he's a murderer. And he has this back and forth. But then, he goes off and he has this spiritual communing moment with his father. And his father was a secure attachment figure. And so now, because he's had this moment of union with his father, his secure attachment comes back in and he knows he can go back to Pride Rock. He knows he's got that. So, when we see these movies about our loved ones coming back or just having that moment, relying on a memory of someone we really, really care about who is a secure person for us, we get that bravery, we get that energy. Attachment goes beyond time and space. And if you take this analysis and go geek out about attachment more, here's what happens. Attachment is stable, meaning it will hold, but plastic. It can change, just like Simba's. And we tend to carry our attachment styles into adulthood. So often what you see are these relationships where an anxious person and an avoidant person will get into a relationship and it looks like a bad cassette. Because initially there's relational safety and they can trust each other.
Yeah.
Over time, there's these micro betrayals. I need proximity and you're running away from me. I can't trust you with my feelings. I need distance and you won't back off. I can't trust you with my feelings. So things deteriorate. All these micro betrayals build up until there's no relational safety. And then what you have, it looks like a bad cassette. I'll refer anyone to page 158 of Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. You got a distance seeker and a proximity seeker, and it goes like this. Like a bicycle or a bad cassette, one follows the other until things deteriorate. And so often when you have people, even if you're dealing with people who haven't been cheated upon or cheated on, they come to us because they can't talk anymore. There's been all these micro erosions of trust. And that micro erosion is felt deeply because now it's not just my synapses. I have a lot, the length of the relationship is long term. So my brain has dedicated many, many synapses to figuring out how I behave around you, how I adapt to you. But it's also, you're now in my nervous system. So when people say you got under my skin, I think the more accurate way is saying, you've got real estate in my nervous system. And I can't get you out. And so with this, you end up with people coming in and the betrayal is all consuming. It is felt in the nervous system. It is reflected in their heartbeat. It is reflected in their cortisol and adrenaline levels. And so when we look at betrayal writ large, we want to go down to, okay, what's the length of the relationship? What's the intensity of the relationship? And if I'm looking at an attachment relationship, I can expect an outsized reaction because that is completely reasonable, knowing the body the way that I do. So I hope that gives you some background around length and intensity and how we think about these things.
Yeah, well, I keep thinking about the word like dependency theory. Whenever you read up on codependency, it
Mm.
sounds like you're hitting on some of that because there are dangers in being codependent
Now,
on someone.
codependent is different to attachment. Um, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's okay.
So secure attachment, I think there's some myth busting to be done. Codependency does exist, and I recommend anybody. I will look up. There's an Instagram page by a fantastic therapist who I think has a post exactly about this, describing the difference between codependency, which can often be between two insecure attachers,
Yeah.
and attachment and secure attachment. So if you look at Levine and Heller's advice, a lot of what they say about secure relating, they talk about the principles of secure communication, and they look almost identical to what mediators coach their clients to do. Say, wear your heart on your sleeve. Don't make generalizations. Bring it back to the I statement. All of these things that us as mediators are always doing, we're basically teaching people, or Levine and Heller are saying, if you want a secure relationship, you need to learn how to relate securely because protest behavior isn't serving you. But the problem is, protest behavior, you were talking about the amygdala earlier.
Yeah.
If we look at the way that the brain lays out, I'm going to use triune theory here. There's a few critiques on it,
Yeah.
but for our purposes, it's going to
And
work.
speak loud because the microphone's facing this way.
Oh, right. Okay. So I just want to use my head as a model. So the way that anything works is we'll get some stimulus. So I pinch myself, that's stimulus. Before I even finished that sentence, I felt a little bit of pain. Now, my brain allocates pain based on two things: how known the thing is, and how dangerous it could be to me. So, like the pinch, what's going to happen is there's some stimulus. It's going to go up my spinal cord. It
Hmm.
will meet at the back of my head. This is my reptilian brain. And I'm
Hmm.
being very general here. Don't quote my neuroanatomy. My reptilian brain is the part of the brain that gets me to breathe, to eat, to sleep. Um, it governs my fight, flight, freeze, and flop fear responses.
Yeah.
Um, Fear, so freeze and flop. I know some people are not as familiar with it as fight or flight. So with fight and flight, um, what we're looking at is uh, people being ready to either run or to engage in fight.
Yeah.
So it activates our sympathetic nervous system. We have an autonomic nervous system. Our sympathetic means that it governs when our pupils dilate, all of our blood goes to our big muscles in our brain, prepping us to fight or flight. Our heart rate goes up, our breathing goes shallow. We're ready to go at it. And very interestingly, we don't heal when we have sympathetic activation.
Mm.
Why? The cortisol's running through, and it makes no sense if a saber-toothed tiger is going to be chasing you to try and allocate energy to healing over a cut. However, its counterbalance is our parasympathetic system. You may have heard of this being called the rest and digest system. I told you yoga connects. So we are constantly looking for parasympathetic stimulation in yoga, at least by the end when you hit that final pose, Shavasana. What's happening here? Our pupils are normal, our heartbeat is steady, our blood goes to all of our organs. Um, it's called the rest and digest system often, or the relax and breathe. And we need to feel safe when we have in order to achieve parasympathetic stimulation. So fight or flight, our sympathetic nervous system is on, it's activated. There's another set of fear responses that we work with. There's actually two other sets. The set that I was discussing with you is freeze and flop. So this is where our parasympathetic system can be hijacked, or our sympathetic and our parasympathetic are hijacked at the same time. So freeze is like this: I'm frozen stiff. Go back to the Lion King, you see that bit where the hyenas show up, and Nala and Simba
Mm.
are frozen stiff. That's freeze. Flop is almost like the Siamese twin of freeze. It's withdraw, get super tired, pull away. These associate, if you look at Daniel Siegel's window of tolerance. I actually have my own model or version of it. I sent you a copy. You can pull it up if you'd like.
Yeah.
So when
Remind
we're,
me the window of tolerance.
yeah, the window of tolerance.
Yep.
In fact, if you hold a second, I'll finish this little spiel and then I'll show it to you in even better detail. So
Yep.
back here's our reptilian brain. Around here-ish is our mammalian brain. This is where a bunch of our social tendencies belong. It's where I'm currently hypothesizing our attachment system is governed, but I'm still learning and still figuring that one out and researching. And then up here we have our prefrontal cortex. Now this is where we do our thinking, our rationalizing, our numeracy. Another way of looking at this is Dan Siegel's hand model. This here is the spinal cord, here is the limbic system, or the reptilian brain, which includes the limbic system. Here is our mammalian brain, and here is our prefrontal cortex. It's not the Olympics. This always wins. If this part of your brain doesn't think you're safe, it's going to engage your fear mechanisms.
Yep.
And when it thinks you're safe, then it's time for your social responses. Am I relationally safe? If your relationships, because remember, they have real estate in our nervous systems, and we have real estate in theirs, which means that if my loved one's life is at risk, my body is going to interpret that and give me the sensations as if my own life is at risk. In fact, there's research out there that says that married men live 7 years longer, but the corollary to that is it really depends on the attachment style. Because if you're in an insecurely attached relationship, it can actually increase your I don't want to misspeak here, but there was a correlation between insecure attachment and heart disease. And that makes sense because your sympathetic nervous system's constantly being activated, your heart rate's going up, and you're not healing. And so it really comes down to the quality of that attachment. Now, one other tip for the mediators is remember that you can get a little overwhelmed as well, particularly when people are getting very high emotion. And it takes on average about 10 seconds for something to get from back here all the way to here. So if you've ever been in that situation where you made a pitch to your boss about something really important, or you were a teenager and you wanted to go to the dance and you didn't know whether your parents were going to let you, and you make your case and you're hanging on their reaction, and this is what you get. And it's absolutely infuriating. Whether they know it or not, they may be buying themselves those 10 seconds to get from the back here, from a reaction to the ability to respond. So that is available to our mediators, and it's available for them to coach their mediation clients, particularly those who are very frustrated about betrayal, to use those 10 seconds, to count those 10 seconds in their head. And remember, as mediators, we have options. Put your clients in caucus.
Yeah. I
Spend the
remember
time
you
with them.
doing that example. Sometime we spoke, before. Um, the book De-Escalate by Douglas Noel, I think, also hit on that, the drinking water model. Just
Oh
10
yeah?
seconds.
I
Just 10
haven't
seconds.
actually read that, but I would really
Yeah.
appreciate it if you were to pass the title on to me.
Yes. Well, he's been on the podcast before. And
Okay.
so we always love talking about these things. But yeah, just taking a sip of water will slow down your response time to potentially help you, save your relationship,
Well,
because not as,
yes,
yeah, go ahead.
yes, and it's actually more effective. Here's why. If you pull up that window of tolerance. So
Yeah.
effectively what's happening is when we're within our window of tolerance, even when we're stressed, and we have that healthy stress, we're connected to our prefrontal cortex. We can do the thinking and the rationalizing. When we are outside of our window of tolerance at the top, so like the glycemias and the thyroids, we have hyper and hypo dysregulation.
Yeah.
So I characterized my hyper with an exclamation mark because it feels like that. That can look like crying, screaming, shaking, red face, hostility, hypervigilance, signs of distress, anxiety, or panic. It could look like calm on the outside, but seething on the inside. Just think road rage.
Yeah.
On the downside, if we exceed our window of tolerance on the bottom, that's hypodysregulation. So this could look like withdrawing or slumping of the shoulders or slumping in general, fatigue. Someone can say something and bam, you've got fuzzy brain, or bam, you're tired. You can have flat affect or what's known as still face like this.
Yeah.
Signs of depression or disorientation. This is freeze and flop at play. So when you see
Mm.
these behaviors in a mediation, put people in caucus and support them. Now, one thing that I have found extremely interesting over my years of research has been there's plenty written about supporting and working with people who are hyper dysregulating, even though we don't use that language. But the working with difficult people or working with the explosive employee, the techniques that are out there that we can read about in the negotiation world deal with hyper dysregulation. When I
Yeah.
first encountered this model and I started looking around what I could do with dysregulated clients, I realized there was almost virtually nothing for hypo dysregulated clients.
Mm.
Um, but what I did discover as I went geeking about and finding my way through it was, if in doubt, follow the paramedics. So that sip of water isn't just a sip of water to buy those 10 seconds. When we are in hypo, whether we're in freeze or flop, um, we're a bit dissociated from our body. So the act of sipping water forces us to do something physical.
Yes.
And that means that we're getting the 10 seconds and we're pulling ourselves back up into our window just a little bit. Crunchy foods, heated sources of heat. So the paramedics will put a blanket around you, they'll give you vitamins, they'll give you hydration. It goes wrong if you're, say, at a cop station and you get donuts and coffee, because what happens? We drink coffee. Say you're a little low in your window of tolerance down there, yeah? We drink coffee for the pick me up, but the
Yeah.
risk we hold is that it'll push us right up into hyper dysregulation. If you've ever had that crazy heartbeat after too much caffeine or the stomach ache, that's hyper dysregulation happening in your body. And if you've ever watched a toddler with too much sugar, there's the crash. So
Well,
sugar and caffeine don't help us.
I never wanted to put on my pre-mediation checklist things like this, but maybe I should start thinking about adding don't drink caffeine before the mediation. You know,
Well, you know,
might that actually be a good tip?
my big tip is this: it's not business appropriate not to have caffeine, particularly in North America or the Western world. So, what I tend to do is I always make sure there's decaf options, and I tend to normalize half calf. So, I'm actually
Yeah.
drinking a half calf right now. And what I'll do is I'll say to my client, would you like, I've got regular decaf and half calf. I'm a huge fan of half calf, and we've got mirror neurons, right? And that means that we copy each other a little bit as we're trying to build rapport. So I know if I'm intentional about normalizing something, they're just more likely to go along with the half calf. Mm.
Funny. Yeah. So no coffee during mediation. That's my thing.
Well, I mean, yeah, yes and no. It's not that it's no coffee during
Yeah.
mediation. It's that they should have this what they would usually have, because the problem is if their body's addicted to caffeine, and caffeine's an interesting drug because it's socially normalized. If you were to look at marijuana or alcohol, um, or anything that's illegal or gray market, these are things we say, okay, no, you can't participate because you're not fit to participate right now,
Mhm.
right? We need you to be sober when you come here. um, and all competent mediators will then say, you know what, let's reschedule the mediation, come back when you're sober. Do you and make the appropriate referrals? Do you need an addictions counselor? Have you spoken to your doctor about this? By the time someone shows up to a mediation a couple of drinks in, we're pretty cognizant that something else is up.
Yeah.
um, but with caffeine, we just don't treat it like a drug, which it absolutely is. So if you have a client who would fall into hypo without their usual caffeine hit, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So we can't say no caffeine. We still have to understand the culture and the dynamics that we're in. But what we can do is really encourage half calf, or top them up with decaf after they've had their regular calf, just to help keep the tone down. Same with sugars. We want more healthy snacks in there, but something crunchy, like I mean, you could go for something like carrots, or a lot of the times we have those healthy biscuits or crackers. We can use those to help people come out of that hypospace, come into their body.
Mhm.
And again, now this, I'm very passionate about it being absolutely unethical to keep clients in a joint session when they are dysregulating. Why? Go back to Hoffman's mediator ethics, his 10 mediator ethics. I can give you the paper there as well. One of them is do no harm.
Yeah.
Another one is voluntariness and self-determination. Well, all the things that people love about mediation, the reasons people buy into it is people want their own deals. They want to craft things that make sense for them. They want control over their lives. When people are negotiating from a place of dysregulation, they fundamentally do not feel safe. So you're hosting a mediation where people feel unsafe. And that does harm. And it translates to their customer experience. When you have people who have buyer's remorse, who say they felt bullied in the mediation, often what happens is they've consented to something in dysregulation. And I've seen plenty of dysregulation in my time. So, we're used to hearing the volume go up. And some people are really keen on saying, okay, everybody, let's bring the tone down. That can work. One thing that I don't always recommend, particularly with long-term attachment figures, is going back to the ground rules. While that's really good for people with a short-term relationship and a low-intensity relationship, because they're just less likely to be dysregulated by hearing, let's go to the ground rules. But if you've ever been in an argument with a loved one and someone tries and enforces the rules of conduct for you, you ignore them or you get annoyed with them. You're too busy focusing because your nervous system's reacting to the attachment figure there. And so instead, it's let's take a break. And then my next big recommendation is choose which client you meet with based on what you can perceive about their attachment style. Someone who's avoidant probably needs the distance anyways. They need the time to calm down. The person who's anxious, however, needs proximity and they clearly can't get it from the other side. So if the mediator goes to them first, that's going to help them reduce their anxiety. If you look at hyperdysregulation, we've all heard name it to tame it, right?
Yeah.
Why does name it to tame it work? Because we experience safety in numbers. And so when someone understands us, we can be up here in our window of tolerance. Someone understands us. They name what's going on. We suddenly feel more safe. We're back into our window of tolerance. We're connected to our prefrontal cortex. Now, pull all of this to betrayal. You cheated on me translates to, you're not going to catch me. You're not my trampoline anymore. Now where do I go? It translates to big feelings of abandonment, of loss, of anger, and it triggers grief responses. Now, what a lot of people know as the cycle of grief or the 5 stages of grief was actually, it stems from research done on people who were dying and in palliative care. So it was their grief around their mortality. And a lot of those are still usable here. So we can expect, if we've got attachment figures, let's assume grief is going to come up in our mediation. Whether that's triggered by a sense of betrayal or a sense of relational loss or a sense of this wasn't the deal. Because sometimes betrayal isn't cheating. It's we said forever and I meant it and you didn't. Or you did then and then you changed your mind. But if you go back to the nature of all contracts, they're all in the future. We can't know what's happening in the future.
Yes.
And so when we get married, we're making a promise to always be a particular way without knowing the circumstances and without knowing who's going to pop into our life and who isn't. And so all of these big feelings come up. So just the fact of the breakup can feel like a betrayal. And I've noticed that there's this relationship dynamic where even in the most mutual breakups, one person realized something was wrong with the relationship earlier. And they tried and tried and tried to get the other person to join them, to fix this. And the other person just heard criticism and complaint. This is often an anxious and avoidant relationship.
Yeah.
We're in trouble. We need to go to therapy. Nothing's wrong. Talk to me about this. I'm really distressed. Okay, fine, but then doesn't hear them. And you see this happen over and over. That that creates this change in readiness, right? Because even in the most mutual breakups, the person who said, "Work with me," often feels relief at the breakup. They tried their best, they've grieved, they're giving up. So, in grief terms, they're accepting.
Yeah.
This one here, though, hasn't gotten that far. Now they're going through their grief. Now they're going through what happened. So there's a disparity in readiness, and that can also create a sense of betrayal. And so this person may well experience the relationship of one of critique, of criticism, of pain, being attacked even. And when it all ends, they go, "What happened? I don't understand what happened." And they tend to take a lot longer to process. So if there's that sort of betrayal, it's really about assessing the party's readiness to mediate. Because the thing that nobody really tells us before we enter mediation training, and a lot of the reasons I think our clients enjoy working with us, is we're hosting several conversations at the same time. So I want you to imagine a braid. That's only 3 strands. We can go for a really, really complicated braid here. Generally, when I'm hosting a mediation, a family law one, and say they co-owned a house and they got a couple of kids, and the in-laws are sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing, depending on how people see it, I'm not just hosting a legal conversation. Yeah, the symptom is there's legal problems.
Sure.
That need to be solved, and we need to get to an agreement. But I am also hosting a conversation about housing. I'm also hosting a conversation about banking. I'm also hosting a conversation around parenting. I'm also hosting a conversation around a breakup. And fundamentally, underneath all of those, I'm hosting a conversation about pain. Someone asked me the other day, maybe 2 weeks ago, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm in pain management." I was talking to a doctor, and I said, "Well, I'm like you. I'm in pain management, except instead of physical symptoms, I deal with legal symptoms."
Yeah.
And then when we solve or manage that pain in an effective way, then my parties can access their prefrontal cortex, and then they are able to negotiate in their own interests and arrive at pragmatic agreements. So I'd say, there's plenty of things to say about betrayal, but the first is understanding the building blocks. Because when you go back to something like the trust game, that's a short-term relationship. You don't even know the other person.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're dealing with an attachment figure, anybody listening, think about the person who is most like a sibling to you. You may have a sibling, you may not. Now think about an argument you had and how upset you were. It does not have to be romantic. It would have hit hard because something you expected of them, whether that was an expectation of care, whether that was an expectation of being heard or helped, or hugged. It's a great model I recently heard of. When 2 people are in an argument and they're attachment figures, the person being approached can ask, heard, helped, or hugged. And the person approaching can select which of those they need and in what order, so that you know what sort of care to deliver, and then of course you can attend to your own emotions afterwards. But again, that requires you being in your window of tolerance, and allows you to know which skill you need to use. I was recently with somebody who's having a cancer scare, and they called their sibling and said, "I'm scared, I have a biopsy." And their sibling said, "Oh, here's all the scientific stuff I know." And they said, "Yeah, I know the scientific stuff, but I'm scared." And the sibling couldn't hear them.
Hmm.
And they were contending with that. Now, how does that feel just hearing that story? I don't even need to put words to it. Ultimately, this is what those, if there's an expectation of care
Yeah.
that doesn't get met, that space there can feel like betrayal. Now, Daniel Siegel talks about how the quality, I'm going to paraphrase here, but basically, the quality of an attachment relationship is not determined by the quality of the rupture, i.e., the argument. It's determined by the quality of the repair. Now, that takes some work, right? Because you have to be available to have the conversation. You have to be in your window of tolerance to have that conversation, or have a third party neutral like a mediator there supporting people and staying within their window of tolerance in order to have that conversation. And it could be that, the person who approached their sibling now says, you know what, I know I can't go to my sibling for emotions, but I can go to my sibling for science, and that's disappointing but good enough for me. It might be that the answer is something completely different. It could be you cheated on me and I trust that we can get over this. Or it could be you cheated on me and I don't trust that you don't love me, and that means I don't trust that you love my kids. And if you don't love my kids, you can't take care of them. And if you can't take care of them, you're going to be a bad dad. And if you're going to be a bad dad or a bad mom, then I don't want anything to do with you, and I should have sole custody. And I should have sole parenting time. And you can see the kids 2 weekends a month.
Yeah.
That's how these things play out. So it's about what sort of betrayal are we hearing? What other factors are here? What are the mechanics of the particular betrayal we're dealing with?
So you said a lot. I'm still digesting it actually. It seems to me that we all have needs, and you were talking about, helped, held, hurt. People have needs, and when you don't feel that the needs are being met, it can feel like a betrayal, right?
Yes.
Or I would say also that it seems that we all have expectations. I'll take even further. It seems like we all have, as to a degree, a sense of entitlement, especially if you're in a marriage relationship, because people make vows to one another. And so you owe me this. And when that person doesn't give it to you and breaks it, is that, the example of where you would feel totally betrayed. That feeling that you were owed a duty, to be faithful, duty to, care and love no matter what. Is even though you don't know the future, I get it. But is that an example of where that feeling of betrayal comes when you don't get it?
I think it's about asking the parties what their expectations were when they entered the marriage. And I'm a
Yeah.
huge fan of marriage contracts, not least for their legal value, or what you would call in your jurisdiction prenuptial agreements.
Yeah.
Not least for their legal value, but also because it fosters the conversations, the
Clarifies.
emotional conversations. What are you looking for from this marriage? There's the vows, and those can be romantic or dictated by an institution or whatever they may be, however your
Mhm.
vows are constructed. But ultimately, what do you expect of this marriage? What do I expect of this marriage? What am I hoping for? Um, and also, do you have the skill set?
Hmm.
A bunch of people marry without the skill set of being in secure relationships. Plenty of people marry incredibly insecurely attached, and they don't know their attachment styles, and they don't know how to work with those. And it's not about pathologizing, it's about, okay, once we know the framework, we can work with that, we can discuss these things. And then you layer things on, right? So now you take someone who is, say, an anxious attacher, who in that proximity seeking engages in criminal behavior, like they start harassing or stalking their ex. Now we've got a family law issue and we've got a criminal law issue, and there's this compulsion to proximity seek. They need support and help to reduce their anxiety that they're trying to manage by engaging in criminal, harassing, upsetting behavior, scary
Mhm.
behavior that's setting off the other person's nervous system, who's now terrified,
Mhm.
and who's not getting rest because their sympathetic nervous system's always on. So it's when you layer that, now you've got a case of, maybe is there a mental health disorder there? Is there alcoholism there? Is there a history of violence there? So now you're layering these things on to create these contextual analyses of what's happening with your parties. So yes, it could be we made those vows and I took them literally. It could also be we made our vows because that's what everybody does, but what I expected was that we would carry on as we were when we first married. And we
Yeah.
know that there's a huge relationship changes around the time of the first child. It's a huge relationship changer. We see plenty of first instances of domestic violence occur during a first pregnancy. You have a significant change in dynamic. Often the expenses increase, the sex decreases, the expectations and the hopes and the wants and the fears around parenting come up. So, if someone says, well, I thought we'd always be the same, I made this vow buying in to us staying the same. That conversation facilitated well would probably use some reality checking from a mediator who says, what's the likelihood of things staying the same?
Yeah.
How many things have stayed the same in the past 5 years in your life? Not even this relationship. And then, so, other times you've got, even if they've been together for, say, 12 years and then they get married, that juncture of children, or that juncture of becoming a caregiver to an adult, a vulnerable adult, or the juncture of just dealing with different crises that show up. What does bankruptcy do to a relationship? What does a sudden inheritance do? So all of these things is really about change management. And I've just started looking at transition theory. And it's far too early for me to speak on it, but I will provide you with the name of an author whose work has come to my attention. I can't
Change
remember it off the
theory.
top, but I will give you that. And I think a lot of the time when people are feeling betrayed, it's often going to, I can't transition through this properly. I can't meet this transition where it's at because my person isn't with me. And then if you pull back and look at a low intensity relationship or a short term, I trusted the store would be open, so I didn't do my groceries and I can't afford takeout. You're making me hungry. You're violating my expectations of what I have at my grocery store that is a fundamental part of my infrastructure. Or the car crash. You violated the idea. You violated our concept that we're going to behave a certain way on the road. And that's what makes me safe on the road. My children safe when I'm driving. You violated the idea that the workplace is a place where I can be safe and I can expand who I am and I can grow and I can produce good work. So you can see all of these violations of expectations.
Yeah. The social contract theory goes into this as well, right?
A little bit, yeah. Well, yeah, social contract theory does, yeah. But it's really comes down to, like, how are we managing this change? Is this person an attachment figure? Because then we need to know that you're being impacted physiologically, which is not always true for these other ones. I might huff outside of the grocery store and go, ugh, and be dysregulated for a little and a little hyper dysregulated and might want to argue. But in short order, I'll probably come back into my window of tolerance, check Google, realize another grocery store is available, jog over there, get my food, and it's somewhat forgotten except for the next time I see that clerk when I think, oh, you're such a jerk.
So, in the last few minutes we have left, let's talk about pulling it together. I know you wrote an article about kintsugi, and this is the practice of rebuilding relationships. You had quoted Siegel earlier about the important thing is the repair, not so much the crack of the relationships, right? And so I'll
Yeah.
screen share the article, and I'll definitely put a link to it as well. But can you close it out by
Mm-hmm.
giving this as a sort of series of tips for mediators on how they can help their parties when there has been betrayal, some deep wounds? How do we help people, get past this?
Yeah, so the first is I co-authored this with the wonderful Irene Grindle and Jess Goldsmith. Um, and what we were looking here was at workplace culture. So there's this Japanese tradition called kintsugi, which is where these vases or cups that are often passed down by generations, we expect that they'll break. We expect rupture over time. And so then the way that I first learned of kintsugi, it was described to me as the family comes together when the sacred object, this heirloom, breaks, and they come together, they make a gold lacquer, and they paint the cracks, and then they stick it back together. So they use the gold lacquer as glue. Um, And what this means is over time, what was an ordinary object that was meaningful becomes more beautiful and more unique after each repair, and it picks up its story and this richness. So what we were talking about here was, I'd extended this concept of the quality of the relationship, or in Siegel's word, to paraphrase Siegel, the quality of the attachment relationship is not that of the rupture, i.e. the conflict, but that of the repair. We talked about, well, does this work in the workplace? And we hypothesized, yeah, it does. You know, if we create a workplace or any culture, whether that be a family culture or a workplace culture or a school culture, of when things go wrong, we address it and we can expect repair. And we know it's okay to say, hey, I dysregulated back there. I wasn't in my window of tolerance. I apologize. Notice that those are two different things. Explanation is one, apology is another. And I know you and I were talking about apology earlier, Mac. Not in this podcast. I think we were having a different conversation.
Yes.
There's research out there to say that an apology perceived as genuine can often go to repair. However, an apology perceived as disingenuous can often exacerbate the cracks. So that would be like pushing the pieces apart instead of gluing them back together with this beautiful gold. So what we were doing here was saying, well, what do we do to foster a relationship? And we called this kintsugiing the culture. Well, if you want to kintsugi your culture, even in your family, it's after we mess up, after we have a rupture, we find ways to repair. We build rituals around repair. We make the time to have the discussion, but first we check if it's safe. Are you okay to hear this right now? Can you talk for a few minutes? It's an intense subject. Or, listen, I've got some news and I don't want to freak you out, but it is important. Can we make time quite soon? And you do that to prep someone, almost like a trigger warning, before you deliver the difficult news. And so in this way, my grandmother died a few years ago, and my sister helped me empty out her place. And we got into an argument pretty much every single day. And we repaired every single day, and we were reflecting on it. And we were saying, this is probably the strongest our relationship's ever been, because it didn't really matter the quantity or even how difficult or upsetting the ruptures were. It was the fact that we repaired and repaired and repaired. And that's really, to my mind, one of the ways that you can identify a secure relationship, that expectation that repair will occur. And I'll also I'll find there's an Instagram post that I like, of a mother recalling a conflict she had with her daughter, and how she walked out of the room and took a breath and took a beat. And then she came back in, and her daughter had this cheeky smile because her daughter expected repair. So it's about being brave enough to say, we expect that conflict will occur. We know it's going to happen. We're open and available and adaptable and ready and able and willing to pick up new conflict resolution skill, to learning about what's happening in our dynamic and making space for repair, and just factoring that into our dynamic. And that means that you end up with a lot more security. So you build these little micro trusts. And at law, if I were to tie this up, sometimes those micro trusts look like, I give that example of, you cheated on me, which means you don't love me, which means you don't love our kids. You ran off with some vagabond musician, and now I'm done, and you're not with us. And the line of credit is being maxed out because you've stopped paying your part of the mortgage. And I've got the kids at home, and you've run off with your musician fellow. Sometimes it's too big of a crack to say, let's deal with the betrayal of the cheating. Sometimes what you do is say, how many other micro breakages are there here? Okay, there's a betrayal around paying the mortgage, which means the line of credit's being maxed out.
Yeah.
What can we do about that? Can we just mediate some payments being made? And as the payments are made on a regular basis, now they can trust this person only financially, and only this much financially, but then that little micro trust turns into, you keep returning the kids on time, and they're actually in really good stead when they come back. They're not tired, they're not hyper. Okay, I can trust you with the kids a little bit more. Oh, you did their laundry. That was great, actually. You didn't used to do their laundry. These little bits. Eventually, it doesn't necessarily mean that you get to the cheating part. And of course, please use therapists and refer clients to therapists. That's what they're there for. Or even get a mental health mediator to co mediate some of this stuff with you. Um, but when people have a big betrayal, sometimes it's just about these teeny tiny little bits that come together to rebuild a new structure. Sometimes so much of the vase is broken that there's this much gold in a hole, right? Sometimes it's just about that. It's about rebuilding things in a way that makes sense in their new dynamic.
Yeah, well, that's a really good way to end it, actually. I was thinking about a recent mediation I was doing where there is zero trust between the
Mhm.
parties. But what you say is correct. Micro trust may be the way to go. And maybe even just doing a temporary agreement and then having the parties live under it and having them come back some weeks or months later. This is why recessing mediations is also a good thing of value sometimes. But any little thing we can do to start having two sides, um, build trust just on one small issue can go a long way
Yes.
toward reestablishing, I guess, rebalancing this thing that got really skewed um,
Hmm.
based on people feeling completely screwed over, for lack of a better word. Um,
Yeah, I mean, again, it's you're transitioning into something new, and that's
yeah.
scary and unknown. And especially if you thought this person was going to always transition with you, and now they're transitioning away. What does that new thing look like in a way that you can trust? And
Yes.
sometimes micro trusts are there.
Yeah. And this is why it is possible for folks who are going through a really terrible divorce and there's been betrayal. It's possible to go through the process and still remain friends afterward,
Hmm.
because you have built trust to the point where, okay, this happened, but we're now going to live, apart, different lives, but we can still have a professional relationship or relationship over our children, a co-parenting relationship that's healthy, that's not completely damaged. But I've just seen the opposite happen where people go through this process and it is so much pain. The tear is so deep and folks, see it as completely irreconcilable for their ability to be able to make some kind of peace with the other side. And the kids will suffer because of it and the relationship, they don't talk to each other. So we've seen the extremes, right? But a mediator helping people build trust, one trust at a time, can go a long way towards helping people transition to this new world where they're going to have to be living under.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. And the having people come back and work on little things, try things out as trials, see what didn't work,
yep,
remediate it into something that does work. That goes a long way, especially in family law files, which last a really long time, especially if they're children.
exactly. All right. So, Raheena Lalani Dahya, thank you so much for coming on the LMI podcast. And folks who want to follow you can, of course, go and search your name into LinkedIn. I'll put your link on the blog post that I write about this, and hopefully people will learn something from this. I certainly did, and so thank you so much. You made me think, as typical, as
Well,
usual.
thank you so much for having me again, Mac. It's always wonderful being here.
Yes, awesome. All right, folks, if you like this recording, check out this and the other ones on lmipodcast.com and on the YouTube channel, and of course on Spotify and everywhere else we put these recordings. All right, until next time, everybody, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.